Lucia Carlsruhe's teacher here, very happy to be back with these episodes, and this time is the part 1 on perception. Perception. Why? I asked you some things on Instagram. I asked you for 4 singers, Beyonce, Lauryn Hill, very young, Tori Harper, Harry Styles and Justin Bieber. They were in different occasions, they were singing. You told me a lot of things that were quite interesting, but the thing is that I asked you, are they perceiving the same? We don't know, since people are different people and we have some specifics in our character, in our way of perceiving the world, in what we give importance into the world, in our system, not only in copying but also how we see the world. But certainly they had something in common. And something in common is something that makes possible to do music together, to enjoy very often the same craft from the same singer for many people, many different people. We can teach because there is something in common. That is the situation in which they were, the fact that they were performing, and something more specific about the fact that they were performing. I chose some that became some renowned and very good singers. I did choose, for example, Harry Styles and Justin Bieber for X Factor, being different people, having different attitudes. One of you told me he looks shyer. I don't know if it was shyer in how I see him. He's a different kind of person, perhaps a little more introverted, perhaps some would say more parasympathetic driven, while Justin Bieber looks more sympathetic driven. But again, it's just a little piece of an opinion I have, so it has absolutely no value, but we see that I have a different attitude, and I think that it could have developed as he has developed. Harry Styles, even not being into a group as the group in which he was, but I think it has been a great way for him to strengthen and grow, because for me, from my point of view, it was a great environment for a person presenting himself like him. And I say again, how can I define the difference? It is not so that important. What it is important is that we acknowledge the differences, we acknowledge what is in common. What it is in common? They're singing. They're singing, choosing to sing. And this, to me, it's quite specific, because it is biologically something very precise, meaning that we have a parasympathetic activation and control from a skeletal muscle point of view. Not only from a visceral point of view, but especially from a skeletal muscles point of view. And this is a point that sometimes it's a bit overlooked into the training and into the plate of the things. Sometimes you just say, okay, this can sing, this can't. To me it has to see why, but very often is because you have all these sympathetic activations, some of us more than others, and the sympathetic activation inhibits the parasympathetic activation and inhibits the parasympathetic system. So what it means? It means that we have to find strategies or patterns or paths or trainings to be able to activate the parasympathetic efferent function in any environment in which is required to sing. And this they absolutely were doing all. Absolutely all. So why am I talking about perception? First, perception of what? We can perceive many things. Are you perceiving your somatic system? Are you perceiving your activations of the muscles? Are you perceiving the sound you are producing by your returning to your ear? Are you perceiving your sympathetic activation, the anxiety? Someone calls it the adrenaline, because they're exactly the same thing. So it depends how you have built yourself, and you are usually in your life, if you feel like anxiety or if you feel like excitation, are you feeling the parasympathetic activation, the groove, the music, the rhythm inside your body, the voice that starts activating into your creative system? Because when we sing, something that is quite cool is that we direct, connect, and we feel that we connect the creative part of us, or a creative part of us, into some muscular activation, some body movement and expression. It becomes something really physical. Are we perceiving the afferent nervous system, that is the capacity of the system to give us information about what is happening inside? And as we know, the parasympathetic, since the cranial nerves episode, the parasympathetic system is, and the vagus nerve is mostly an afferent, so it gives you information about the organs inside. And when we sing, we do some different thing with those organs than when we live. And when we start and we have not too much experience, or our craft is not grown enough, can be a disturbance and not a reference point. And it's there that we have some confusion or too much information, and we are overwhelmed into the system. Because if we are perceiving too much, or things that are not in line with our life but are mostly in line with the singing, we have a conundrum. We have a question that happens in our mind. Which one I have to put in hierarchy? Do I have to mind if I'm feeling strange because where usually I stretch the pulmonary, or the lungs if you prefer, tissue, I'm not stretching anymore. And instead I'm stretching parts of the lungs that usually I do not stretch. Because this is going to interfere with my survival reflexes and mechanisms. And it will say, no, 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 you're going to die. We know you're not going to die, but you're going to sing. But you have to remain and to choose into this conundrum which one to refer to which one give more importance, or simply remaining overwhelmed for a little, but choosing the movement, stretching what we usually do not stretch, and not stretching what we usually stretch. Confiding that it has a sense, there is a knowledge behind, and it will not remain this overwhelming experience for all the time. It will change, because perceptions change. This article I put is something pretty important, and it is the fact that by reinterpretation, meaning reframing or distancing, we will have a different emotional activation to the same kind of disturbances or disturbing images that previously elicited a higher response and then a lower response. So we are not working there on changing the fact that we are going to be being exposed to something of that kind, but we can change our response to that something of that kind by reframing or distancing. And distancing, what it means? Distancing from what? From thoughts, from feelings, from perceptions. we give to ourselves the idea and the doubt that perhaps this thought, this feeling, this perception are yes true, are yes real, but they are not in line with all the reality we are experiencing. Also meaning they don't put ourselves into the correct context in which we are. We have this doubt. Having this doubt, we can distance ourselves from reacting on those feelings, thoughts and perceptions. And this is a strategy that has been seen activating another part of the brain that makes us less impulsive, less reactive, more strategic, also said able to be correctly functioning with other laws, meaning seen into a different context the situation. Reframing is something of the sort, and it is when we activate the capacity of seeing in a different way with other hierarchies and other possibilities of meaning of the exact reality in which we had some elicitation and perceptions, but the fact that we can reframe because we don't have only those perceptions, we have a lot of different perceptions. But reframing is deciding which one we are going to choose to believe, to strengthen, to, how can I say, shut down from the importance, taking them down as a little noise in the backwards, and others putting them in the center. Reframing permits to do that. What is an example of reframing? Lauryn Hill singing at the Apollo, being booed. They're booing me. Oh, how much I want to sing, I want to become a singer. They're not booing everything. How much I love this song. How was it, the phrase I'm going to do now? Oh, I'm losing the perception of those muscles that bring me back connected to my voice. Oh, I'm not pronouncing the words. Oh, how much is beautiful there, doing that sound in that way. Oh, I'm a failure. They are all there. They are all somewhere true. What can we elicit as the one or the ones that we want to have? Can we choose? By reframing, we give ourselves possibility to choose more than before. We do reframing not only when we are under a competition, a performance or something, a concert. We do that in all the training process. That is why we use, as we said, the open training and not the closed practice. So to put some novelty and some different capacities into the plate and be able to reframe how? In a progressive load, in a way that is not constantly overwhelming, because sometimes it can be overwhelming even if the system is not overwhelmed, but our system of perception, yes. But it's not convenient for the training constantly, meaning it has to be challenging but not crushing, not too tough. As Lauryn Hill had such a huge problem after? No. Why? Because probably it was correctly framed. Has Harry Styles been crushed by the fact that they said you are too young and inexperienced to be chosen for this year, for us there? Absolutely not. probably because he had the capacity to reframe. And he saw what they were telling. They were telling in parallel many things. And these systems of value were good enough, or sane enough, or he has had others helping him, I don't know, I have no idea, to frame correctly what they were saying. Because as we hear, it was absolutely a successful audition. So, what are the perceptions we have that makes our instrument different from the others? When we play piano, we have a visual way of controlling what we are doing, and if our internal perception and afferent system is telling us something that is in line with what we see. For singing, we don't have this. Sometimes we try to have this by what we call listening to ourselves, and it will be in part 2 and part 3 that I will talk about that. I will do another episode on the good of the perception and the bad of the perception. Exactly, reframing. Yeah, because we do that all the time, just talking, reframing our ideas on the instrument, reframing how we look for things so that it is not inappropriate to be adaptive into the direction that we want and what we want. What usually we don't calculate, and it's very important for singing, it's also important for every other instrument, but for singing it's absolutely basic, because it's something that we have and we don't have many other options while we are singing other than some references that very often are more tricky than for the other instruments, is that, for example, if you look here, ligaments, we have this ligament of the, here it is, no I can't, I will put later because it's too small, yeah, this little ligament here that you can see. Then that is the lateral arcuate ligament. The other ligaments, for example, here, the anterior longitudinal ligament in the lumbar parts, and again I will put the photo as usual, or into, for example, all those ligaments you have into the hips. What are? Yeah, they are there to maintain the shape and the integrity of the bones together. But as I said other times, they don't do just that. They do something very important. Not all the ligaments, but some specific ligaments into the joints will tell the brain the perception of the tension, the speed, and the place, meaning the degrees in the range of motion of the joint. And this will elicit a coactivation of the antagonist. You don't coactivate the antagonist. When you do coactivate the antagonist, it's called co-contraction, and usually it's not a thing that we want. We can use for some structure for some specific reasons, because sometimes coactivation arrives at the too late or not in the good time, in the good moment, for many reasons. So co-contraction can be a better option at the face of not having the correct coactivation in the correct moment, but it's absolutely on the side and something that we structure after having worked on the system and the system of the correct coactivations. So those ligaments give the brain perceptions. Those perceptions will do what? Will activate muscles. And we perceive what? Some other activations. So something that is very confusing for you, and it's a very important point, I will talk mostly of that into one of my posters at Philadelphia. So in here I will just slightly say, when I come back from Philadelphia I will bring to you all the concept, is that in singing we have to assess, and what we usually talk about are not directly the actions we are doing, but sometimes we talk on the effect of these actions. So the references sometimes are on the perceptions you have into the response of the system to the first action. That is why it's so subtle and so tricky. Because the first point we ask you to develop the structure is to do some actions, but those actions into an untrained system or not experienced will not immediately provoke all that you want, not in the sound, not in the perceptions, not in the references, and still you have to do them. Why? Because you want to get to the point in which those actions will provoke exactly the response, also said the reaction that you want, as Michael Trimble brilliantly says. Very often is the first that pointed explicitly this on the side of me. I didn't know anybody else telling that so vocally and so at the center of the importance. So that, for example, for bel canto, when you do the breathing of the bel canto, you create conditions to have the reaction of the diaphragm that is a consequence of some other direct actions. And those direct actions are not the reaction of the diaphragm that you will find on which you will sing. That is why it's tricky. Because you have perception of what? Us, when we are trained or we have knowledge, we take as reference some other perceptions. When you are training, you have the system that is not giving you that till a certain point. So you go into a void of perceptions or with perceptions that are confusing. And it's not a bad thing, it's just as it is. I will put, and I will talk more extensively, and this is another point important, this of Andrew Huberman, that points to the fact that you're going to have a response in the anticipation of what you think the environment or the situation is going to be. And if you think, I have the idea is the placebo effect. Don't know, they will study, they will sell, but I have a little of idea that is likely is that. What it means that you create a reality. Yes, of course. Can be a delusion if it has nothing to do with the reality in which you will find yourself. Can be a fantastic point if it is close to the reality in which you will be. Because so you are not only reacting to the environment, you have yet reacted to the environment, you are multiplying the adaptation. Maria Callas did something quite brilliant. I was so lucky to find myself doing the same thing and then discovering she did the same thing, but we are not alone. There are plenty of people who have done that. She used to do all the interpretation and the opera she was studying as in a rehearsal, just with the music in front of her, without moving a muscle. But as exactly as if she was doing that. This is something very, very precious, because if you learn to do it well, you can feel where you have activations that you didn't acknowledge, often you didn't want, there are reflexes very often, that the structure is doing for some other reasons. And so you can put them into context, meaning sometimes they have nothing to do with what you want to do, and there are disturbances into the neurological activation that you want and the muscular activations that you want. And so you can clean them up. And it's really, really powerful. You can do that from a certain point of view. It's what sometimes we call, I get into the flow and I get so precise that the song is really coming out in a certain way. Yeah, you're doing exactly the same thing. So when you tell me there in that flow you have we have two environments that we have to take into account. The environment we anticipate, because we are anticipating beings. We all the time, and the references we have is to anticipate better. And then the reality. And we have to create the advantage we want, so that sometimes we can be exactly the reality we are going into. Sometimes it can be less, and we have maladaptive in this side that is not into the same ensemble. But at the same time, we can make traction and change the reality and the environment by this slightly different reality we are creating that has something in common, and we push it. That is why I'm doing this on perception, because it's very powerful, very important. It has not certitudes, but it has some good practices to use. And see you next time about that. Have a nice week. Another recap.